step into the turbulent world of 18th-century British royalty, where privilege and confinement intertwined to shape the life of Princess Sophia, Matilda of Hanover. Born into splendor yet stifled by secrecy and protocol, Sophia's journey offers a revealing look at how even the highest ranks of society could become a gilded cage. Beneath the glamour of Buckingham Palace, stories of quiet rebellion, whispers of scandal, and acts of gentle charity unfold. Discover how a woman once poised to forge strategic European alliances instead found herself navigating palace intrigue, personal sorrow, and the unwavering demands of a monarchy that both nurtured and constrained her. Born in 1777, Sophia Matilda of Hanover occupied a singular space within a sprawling royal family that often felt as confining as it was prestigious. She was the 12th child of King George III and Queen Charlotte, part of a lineage that linked her to countless monarchs across Europe. Yet, despite her elevated station and her proximity to power, much of her life seemed defined by its limitations, its quiet corners, and the perpetual sense that her destiny was being shaped by forces beyond her control. From her earliest years, she existed in the shadow of both royal expectation and familial uncertainty, caught between the grandeur of palaces and the strictures that governed how a princess should think, behave, and, most crucially, marry. Her childhood was spent in a succession of royal residences, each one magnificent yet oddly suffocating. Buckingham House, later known as Buckingham Palace, was where she was born. But that majestic setting did little to free her from the confines of a sheltered upbringing. With 14 siblings, including 2 future kings, George IV and William IV, her family should have been vibrant and bustling, yet Queen Charlotte's firm will combined with King George III's periods of mental instability produced an atmosphere that was at times tense, uncertain, and oppressively controlled. The Queen, who intended to keep her daughters as companions, placed them in what the princesses themselves sardonically labeled the nunnery. Indeed, the royal daughters lived under such close supervision that social engagements were rare, and any hope of an independent future seemed distant. Sophia's education was primarily managed by private tutors who reported directly to her mother. They taught her the languages deemed appropriate for a future consort, French and German being paramount, as well as music, painting, and etiquette. By contemporary accounts, she displayed a talent for music, particularly for playing the harpsichord. Some glimpses of her shone through when she performed for her family, yet the outside world had little occasion to appreciate her abilities. There were no grand tours, no widely attended balls in her honor, nor any visits to distant courts that might have allowed her to develop alliances or friendships. Instead, her daily life revolved around a rigid schedule: lessons in the morning, practice sessions in the afternoon, possibly a short walk under strict supervision, and dinner with her sisters if they were not also caught in their own lessons or obligations. Court life under King George III might have been less claustrophobic if the monarch had consistently been in good health. Unfortunately, his intermittent periods of mental illness cast a long shadow over the entire family. Whenever his condition worsened, the atmosphere in the palace would tense, with courtiers walking on eggshells and Queen Charlotte tightening her grip on the household. The princesses felt this keenly, as their freedoms, already minimal, were curtailed further whenever their father's condition slipped. Sophia, perhaps more than some of her siblings, seemed to internalize the worry that her father's illness could erupt at any time, turning warm paternal affection into confusion or distance. She adored him in his lucid moments. He was known to be gentle and kind toward his daughters. Yet, the unpredictability of his affliction meant that warmth was always tinged with anxiety. Unlike some of her more assertive sisters, Sophia was by nature reticent and soft-spoken, a trait that endeared her to the king but also left her vulnerable to the queen's formidable resolve. While her sister Princess Mary occasionally voiced her frustrations about their cloistered lives, Sophia rarely ventured to question her mother directly. It was perhaps this sense of meek compliance, combined with her evident musical talents, that led Queen Charlotte to keep her so close. The queen, often anxious and controlling, valued a daughter who would neither rebel openly nor demand too many liberties. Consequently, Sophia saw little of the social sphere she might otherwise have enjoyed as a young woman of royal rank. Her late teenage years offered the slightest hint of a different future. For a brief period, there were whispers in royal circles about potential engagements for the Hanoverian princesses. Politically expedient matches were the norm, and Princess Sophia, with her lineage and connections, could have brought valuable alliances to the British crown. However, the king's recurrent bouts of illness threw these plans into disarray. Moreover, Queen Charlotte showed a marked reluctance to let her daughters go. Perhaps she dreaded losing their companionship. Perhaps she feared that a foreign court might not properly care for her daughters, or might exploit King George's precarious health for political gain. Whatever the underlying reasons, no serious negotiations ever materialized for Sophia. Instead, the talk of betrothals faded, leaving her with the realization that her life would likely be spent in the same circles she had known since infancy. A few years into adulthood, Sophia found herself moving between residences such as Kew, Windsor, and Buckingham Palace, often in the company of her sisters, Augusta, Sophia, Elizabeth, and Mary. They shared a peculiar brand of camaraderie, forged by the fact that most of them were also unmarried, living under the Queen's watchful gaze. Public events, if they occurred, tended to be choreographed affairs, with each princess appearing dutifully beside her mother, exchanging pleasantries with foreign visitors, peers, and members of the aristocracy. Sophia's interactions with men outside her immediate family were so strictly regulated that it came as a shock when rumors began circulating about a possible love affair. The whispers suggested that she had formed a relationship with Major General Thomas Garth, a trusted officer within the royal household. Even more sensationally, some alleged that she had borne him a child in or around 1800, who was then handed off to be raised in secrecy. Contemporary reports were muddled at best, lacking any conclusive proof. Yet the rumor persisted with unusual tenacity, swirling through aristocratic drawing rooms and capturing the public's imagination whenever scraps of gossip leaked beyond the palace walls. It might have been nothing more than idle speculation, but it stuck, possibly because people harbored a deep fascination with the private lives of the royals, especially the possibility of scandal. For Sophia, this unconfirmed rumor loomed over her, threatening to stain her reputation in a manner that was particularly devastating for a princess in her position. She never publicly acknowledged or denied the story in a way that put it fully to rest, and the royal family, historically averse to acknowledging any hint of scandal, maintained a deafening silence. The effect on Sophia was to make her even more withdrawn, and some observers noted that around this time she became less inclined to appear at social engagements. Throughout her 20s and 30s, the political situation in Britain took on new forms. King George III's illness worsened, culminating in a Regency Act that transferred many of his powers to his eldest son, George, who became Prince Regent. This transition significantly changed the flavor of court life. Where King George had been relatively frugal and morally upright, the Prince Regent reveled in extravagance, socializing with aristocrats known for flamboyant lifestyles, and overseeing lavish events that sometimes clashed with his father's more conservative ethos. If Sophia hoped that the Prince Regent might be more lenient about allowing his sisters some measure of freedom, she was destined for disappointment. He was often too preoccupied with his own affairs, both political and personal, to concern himself deeply with the marital prospects or personal independence of his many sisters. In 1818, Queen Charlotte died, and the immediate result was a partial loosening of the constraints that had bound the princesses. With their formidable mother no longer enforcing a strict household regime, some of Sophia's sisters found opportunities to marry, albeit relatively late in life. But for Sophia, the window seemed to have closed years earlier. Whether it was her own hesitancy, the lingering scandalous rumor, or simple bad timing, she never entered into a formal engagement. She continued to live in the proximity of her siblings, partaking in charitable events, making rare appearances at courtly gatherings. Most days, though, she was content, or resigned, to remain in the quiet spaces of the palace, reading, practicing music, and corresponding with friends who had similarly constrained existences. Her charity work became one of the few ways she could engage with the world beyond the palace gates. Although she never wielded significant influence or championed grand causes, she was known to donate modest sums to philanthropic societies and occasionally visited children's homes, offering compassion in a realm where so many aristocrats remained aloof. Given her gentle disposition, she likely found solace in these quiet acts of kindness, seeing in them a small but meaningful reflection of her personal values. In a sense, her philanthropy was a subtle rebellion against the passivity expected of her. While she lacked a grand public profile, she made an effort, however limited, to ease the suffering of others. During the 1820s and 1830s, Sophia's life took a turn when she relocated to Kensington Palace, where she lived alongside other members of the extended royal family. Around this same time, her young niece, Princess Victoria, was coming of age under the guardianship of the Duchess of Kent. The household at Kensington became a center of activity, yet much of the power within it was controlled by Sir John Conroy, a man who wielded enormous influence over the Duchess of Kent, and, by extension, the future Queen. As Sophia aged, she experienced the first signs of failing eyesight, a condition that would eventually render her blind. This vulnerability made her increasingly dependent on those around her, a situation that Conroy was quick to exploit. Conroy's reputation for manipulation preceded him. He isolated Victoria from many of her paternal relatives, seeking to consolidate his position as the gatekeeper to the young princess. Sophia, older, quieter, and with no direct line to the throne, was both a convenient target and a potential source of information. Rumors suggest that Conroy leveraged the old stories of Sophia's alleged illegitimate child to keep her compliant, hinting that if she did not cooperate in his schemes or follow his directives, he might breathe new life into the scandal. For Sophia, who had spent her life under the weight of strict moral expectations, even the possibility of disgrace was terrifying. She found herself acquiescing to his demands, occasionally serving as a reluctant informant. Her failing eyesight further eroded her ability to resist. Documents from the period note that by the late 1830s, she was nearly blind, forced to rely on attendants or family members to read letters and handle finances. Conroy deftly inserted himself into this role. He managed not only her daily affairs, but also her funds that should have provided a modest sense of security for a princess who had never married. Over time, it became apparent that he was using those finances for his own benefit. By the time she realized the extent of his actions, there was little she could do. She was isolated, aging, and lacking any real ally capable of standing up to him. Her siblings were caught in their own webs of responsibility, or, in the case of her brother George IV, and later William IV, the demands of the throne. The young Princess Victoria, too, struggled under Conroy's machinations, although she eventually gained the throne in 1837 and quickly distanced herself from him. But that did not undo the damage done to Sophia, who remained in a precarious state at Kensington. Visitors to her residence at Vicarage Place in the 1840s described an elderly princess who moved carefully through dimly lit rooms, feeling her way along corridors with the help of a servant. She still wore the formal gowns required of her rank, and she still maintained a soft, polite demeanor, greeting old friends and occasional relatives who came to call. Yet the sparkle she might once have possessed was gone, replaced by a stoic acceptance of her lot. Members of the royal family who were on better terms with her, such as her sister Mary, or her sister-in-law Queen Adelaide, the widow of William IV, tried to provide comfort. They visited, brought updates on court life, and sometimes interceded to ensure Sophia's needs were met. Prince Albert, the consort of Queen Victoria, is said to have shown kindness during his visits, speaking gently to her and ensuring she had the necessary medical attention. Still, these small gestures could not compensate for the ongoing exploitation of her finances by Conroy, which left her more or less impoverished by the standards of a princess. She spent her final years in this state of uneasy dependency, marked by ill health and the emotional toll of so many regrets. One can only imagine the thoughts that drifted through her mind as she aged. Memories of the father she adored yet watched deteriorate, recollections of the mother who kept her so tightly bound, flickers of the scandal that dogged her, and the question of whether she might have had a different life if only her family's circumstances had allowed it. In those reflective moments, she might have found some solace in the presence of the nieces and nephews who occasionally brightened her drawing room with youthful energy. Perhaps it touched her heart to see Queen Victoria, her niece, exercising the power and independence that Sophia had never been granted. On May 27, 1848, her life quietly ended. She was 70 years old, and in her final hours, she was visited by close family members, her sister Mary, the Duchess of Kent, and the Duchess of Cambridge. The staff who tended to her reported no dramatic final words, no last-minute confessions or revelations. Perhaps the rumors of an illegitimate child weighed on her until the end, or perhaps she had long since come to terms with the unresolved nature of that chapter in her life. Her death did not provoke widespread public mourning. The country was occupied with political developments and the ongoing life of a monarchy that was increasingly focused on Queen Victoria's reign. Nevertheless, her funeral arrangements carried a small measure of defiance. Rather than being interred in the traditional royal mausoleum at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, she requested to be buried at Kensal Green Cemetery in London. There, she would lie near her brother Augustus Frederick, the Duke of Sussex, who had likewise broken convention in various ways. While Kensal Green was no humble churchyard, it was not the time-honored resting place for a daughter of King George III. This decision, modest as it might appear in comparison to the grand gestures typical of royal funerals, sent a quiet message about her yearning to make even a small choice for herself. Her estate, when examined, proved to be largely depleted, confirming the years of financial manipulation that had plagued her final decade. Subsequent to her death, the immediate coverage in newspapers and periodicals was scant. Sophia had never occupied a prominent public role, and she left behind no spouse or acknowledged children to mourn her. Over the following decades, references to her would surface sporadically in discussions of the House of Hanover, usually overshadowed by the more dramatic stories of her brothers, George IV's messy personal life, or William IV's intrigues, and ultimately swallowed up by the grand narrative of Queen Victoria's epic-defining reign. Yet, among historians who took the time to delve into diaries, letters, and fragmentary records, Sophia's story emerged as emblematic of how complex and often restrictive a royal life could be for a daughter in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Today, Sophia's name might resonate primarily with those who study the Georgian era, who delve into the personal histories of George III's children, or who harbor a fascination for the lesser-known branches of British royalty. Yet her experiences mirror those of many aristocratic women of her period, circumscribed by social expectations, overshadowed by paternal or spousal authority, occasionally touched by scandal, yet rarely permitted a chance to address it. In that sense, her story is not merely a royal curiosity, but a window into the broader constraints placed on women in high society at the dawn of the 19th century. She might have worn exquisite gowns and borne the title of Princess of the United Kingdom in Hanover, but beneath the pomp was a woman whose life was shaped by limitations she never fully overcame. If her memory lingers in the archives, through letters that reveal her modest hopes or diaries that hint at her private frustrations, then perhaps it offers a reminder that royal history is not only about the grand events, the abdications, and the coronations. It is also about the quieter existences of those who slipped through the cracks of public attention, leaving behind faint echoes of suppressed potential. Princess Sophia Matilda's royal life was one such tale. Subdued, yet filled with undercurrents of longing, overshadowed by rumor yet steadfast in its dignity, and forever bound to a monarchy that provided her with both privilege and sorrow in equal measure.